Hey, welcome to What's Up Wednesday with Renee Weaver-Wright here at My Virtual Academy. We're glad to have you with us today, and I just want to remind you, if you have any questions today, if you want to enter them in, to type them in, and we'll try to address them and answer them as we're going along here. So please don't hesitate to type in any questions that you might have so we can address those and get answers for your questions. Communications is very important in the world that we live in today. I remember when I was a little girl and I would go to my grandmother's house that she had a party line at her house, and that meant that there were 3 other people that used the same phone number and the same telephone line as she used. And if she needed to make a phone call, she had to pick up the phone first and see if any of her other 3 people that shared the line, they were all neighbors of hers, were on the line. She had to wait to make her phone call, and if it was an emergency, she would have to say, "This is an emergency, you have to get off the line," so she could make her phone call. Then I remember when I was a little bit older, on Sunday nights we would call my grandparents, and we always had to wait until a certain time, and it always had to be Sunday night because that's when the telephone rates were that much cheaper to make those kinds of phone calls. And when you think about today, our communication system that we have and how we just use our cell phones for everything, for our banking, for our communicating, for our picture taking, for our video taking, all those different kinds of things. I often wonder, what would my grandmother think when she remembered and used that party line for so long. So communications is so important though, and it's one of the things that we really pride ourselves on here at My Virtual Academy and our Step Up program as well. You might remember last week we talked about our Step Up program, and this is a program that kids can enter any time of the year. It doesn't have to be September or October. They can enter this program any time of the year. They have to be a student that is at risk of falling behind in their high school or middle school program from where they're at, or a teen parent, or a variety of different categories that the students have to meet. But it's pretty broad and really encompasses most students. You'd be very surprised. But these students, they start class every month. They take a different class every month and complete it and work toward either completing their middle school year or their high school diploma. We have with us today Mr. Lindeman, who's one of the advocates for the Step Up program. And what we do with the advocates for Step Up is every day they're given a list of students who have worked in the last week. And they have a roster of students, and they compare their roster of students to the students who have worked. And they look to see what students are on their list that may not have worked yet, and those are the first students that they target to contact during that day, because if the student has not worked yet that week, that's a signal that we need to get in touch with that student right now and find out what's going on in that student's life and how we can help them to get back on track and back to completing their course for the month. We communicate with the students in a variety of ways. We call them, of course, on every phone number that we have for them. We text our students. We do Zoom videos with the students, like a video classroom. And we email the students, either through the software program that we use for the curriculum or regular general emailing. So we try to communicate every way possible. Mr. Lindeman, what are some ways that you communicate with your students?
Well, most effective way I've found so far has been texting. Although I prefer phone calls, so my first attempt in trying to contact students always starts with phone calls.
Okay.
If I am able to contact the student, usually I've had a lot of students entertain, 20, 30-minute conversations just based on what they're doing. Because that also helps you build a rapport with the student in terms of finding out when you get those numbers and we receive those lists of who's doing the work and who's not, you have a more intimate idea of knowing for what reasons those students are not working.
Right. Our students have a lot of life going on, don't they?
Yeah,
a lot of things.
A lot of stories. So it's super important to be a good listener, which again is why I prefer phone calls. Just try to encourage the students to have more apt communicative skills with adults or people of figures of authority, which, speaking of how I view myself as an advocate, I don't necessarily like to take on the approach of a figure of authority so much as I do someone who's a conduit of information for the student to really support them, because I feel like a lot of the times, given the students that we have in the program, their experiences with institutionalized education hasn't been the best.
Right.
So for them, I try to accommodate that sense of anxiety or fear.
Yes, and for their parents too, quite often. The parents have not always had the best experiences with education. And so that trickles down to the kids as well. So I remember one time we had a student that finished up, and the parents said, well, you know, that's great that they're done and they've graduated, but aren't you going to call me next week? Because they got so used to that conversation and that understanding voice on the other end of the phone, and the person that was always helping to find ways to motivate their student that they had had trouble motivating, or else they wouldn't be in a program like ours if that were the case. But the parents even become very attached, I guess, to the advocates, as well as the students becoming attached to them. So, how do you motivate a student that is on your list? You start getting those lists on Thursdays, I believe,
yep.
And still it comes Tuesday and they haven't worked yet. What do you say to those students, and what do you do to try and get them to get working and get back in the swing of things?
Well, I mean, I suppose after sort of what I would call like an intensive review of the student's history, if they have history with us, mm-hmm. or their application file, just to get a good gauge as to how I should approach the student. Afterwards, communicate with them, let them open up. More so I don't try to pressure them or press them if I don't have an established rapport with the student, so I try to develop that rapport at mm-hmm. first. You know, and I'm not trying to like bang down the door right. in terms of letting them open up. So I really just try to encourage them to have casual conversation for us to get to know each other, which is, when you say like having a connection with the student, I mean it's genuine, it's real, it's
right.
not something that I'm just contrived and trying to orchestrate.
Yeah.
And when you have that sort of genuine approach to students, I think they sense that, mm-hmm. and so it gets mm-hmm. them to sort of open up and at the very least start to see things perhaps from your perspective in terms of trying to get the work done on time, mm-hmm. and how beneficial that is
yes.
for the student
yes,
themselves.
What the benefits are to,
exactly.
to doing that. So can you share with us a student success story that you have?
Well, that's interesting. I've been working with ATS for about a year, just a little under a year, mm-hmm. and as you know, I took a reprieve for a couple months to go mm-hmm. study abroad. So I was kind of miffed at the sense that I was starting to develop that rapport with the students
okay.
prior to.
Okay.
So I'm really working on that right now, and I really want to get to know these students a lot more. So I would say that the success cases that I had are more so minute and daily.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
So again, mm-hmm. breaking down those barriers mm-hmm. and being able to mm-hmm. communicate with students and learn more about them and having them
right.
open up.
Right.
So for instance, I mean, I've had a student who, for the first few calls I've had, just not very talkative. I had to do a lot of talking. I felt kind of exhausted at the end of the conversation. So by the end, I was like, okay, so next time maybe, you know, I can just hear a little bit more from you, mm-hmm. and we can just try to move the conversation more towards what you want to say or what you're feeling at the moment. So once I developed that next call, we end up taking a mastery test together.
Okay.
And the mastery test is a little difficult for the student, and taking a test with students is just super revealing
right.
as to
right.
you know who they are and where their
mm-hmm.
educational levels are and how to approach them after that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just fascinating every time I get to take a mastery test with a student,
mm-hmm.
or even a tutorial, or just talk to them about
right.
how they're approaching and
right.
really get into the nitty-gritties of what their assignments are.
And that's one of the things we do. We don't take the test for the students, but we work with them on test-taking approaches, and we coach them on areas that they have weaknesses, so that when they do go to take that test, they're better suited to be successful.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things too with our students is they're not used to being successful, and so they don't know how to handle that sometimes. But I really liked your point about building the small successes with the students. That's what you see as you know, you don't have a big aha story, mm-hmm. but you feel that you're making a difference every day. You know, in the lives of the students, and that's what's so important with the kids that we're dealing with, is to try to do that every single day. So another thing that Mr. Lindeman does is he is one of our Motivation Monday speakers. We have a quote for the week, for every week for the year, that we're focusing on and talking with our students about, and talking with our staff about, and doing all of that. And you kind of lead a discussion with the students. You talk about the quote, and
right.
then you lead a discussion where the students can chime in mm-hmm. and share their thoughts and how they interpret the quote. And any stories from that? Or anything to share?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
so that's where conversations get really, I feel like, deep for students. Mm-hmm. I think it's more so like the peer-to-peer, mm-hmm. because I preface every conversation or every introduction that I have with the student the same way that I do for the Motivational Mondays, and that's just kind of establishing how I view myself in the situation. So just as someone who's to support, not to make any judgments, and to truly hear what an individual has to say. So I try to pass it on to the students so that when we're having a deep conversation on potentially controversial subjects, that everybody gets to say what they feel and not feel pressured to one way or another and has a voice. So that's exactly what I'm trying to promote in the Motivational Mondays is active, engaged, critical communication. Right, and that's been kind of a fun thing that we've started this year. So speaking of communications, did we have any questions from anyone that they wanted to ask us? No. All right, no questions. Thank you so much, Mr. Lindeman, it was a pleasure.
Being with us
Thank
today.
you.
And we really, again, stress the communications. So if you have questions about our program, our Step Up program, or our My Virtual Academy program, please don't hesitate to contact us. And we so appreciate you joining us and want to thank you for joining us every Wednesday at 12:30. And we'll be back again next Wednesday with another What's Up Wednesday segment. So have a great rest of the week, and we look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. Thanks.